we asked, are we too sensitive about racism? Here's what you told us. 85% of those of you who texted in said we are, 15% said no. Why can't racist insults be settled with a sorry and a handshake? Because, says one of our guests, ethnic minorities already face a lifetime of abuse. Should any racist insult lead to an immediate red card on or off the pitch? Or have we become too sensitive about racism? Good morning, welcome to Sunday Morning Live. Many have called for Sepp Blatter's resignation this week over his comments on racism. He's since apologised. But can white people ever really understand what causes racial offence? IVF fertility procedures are on the up, but figures out this week showed a big rise too in the numbers of single women receiving it on the NHS. Should the state be creating single mums? And ever get that feeling you've been here before? Coronation Street star William Roach, a man who lives two lives, actually thinks we lead many more.
Reincarnation is real. And if we all led our lives with a better understanding of that principle, the world would be a much better place.
Well, my guests this week have all been witness to the issues we're debating. John Amici made millions as an NBA basketball player, but that didn't buy him immunity from being called the N-word. Carol Malone was on the infamous Big Brother, where housemates were accused of making racist remarks about Shilpa Shetty. And before becoming chairman of Granada Television and trying to fix the NHS, Sir Jerry Robinson trained as a Catholic priest. Which of those experiences shook his faith in reincarnation may become clear shortly. We'd like to know what you think this morning. Call in now to challenge any of our guests on any of our three debates on Skype. It's your chance to give your views on Twitter, Facebook or by phone. Phone calls cost up to 5 pence a minute from a BT landline. Calls from mobiles and other networks may cost considerably more. Texts will be charged at your standard message rate. So this week the headlines have been about racist language on the football pitch, but surely what's even more important is racial abuse in everyday life. Do casual racist insults make it easier for people to commit violence against those who look different? Or in modern multicultural, are we too sensitive about racism? FIFA President Sepp Blatter apologised this Friday for suggesting racism on the pitch should be met with a handshake. Many felt he should have resigned. The controversy started when Chelsea's John Terry was accused of racially abusing another player. As he's currently being investigated, many felt he shouldn't have captained England this Tuesday. Numerous campaigns have largely eradicated the overt racism seen in the 80s, when players like John Barnes had bananas thrown at them. But should we now have a zero-tolerance approach to racist remarks, even in the heat of play? Because some say racist language just encourages racist violence and dehumanises people who look different. Sepp Blatter has now advocated zero tolerance to racism. But is that an overreaction? Or in modern Britain, is any racist comment something that we should never tolerate? Well, John Amici, are we too sensitive about what might cause offence?
In short, no. I think the fact is there's really good science that people saying bad things about people, racially or otherwise, for other demographics, leads to action.
OK, well, that's the question for our text vote this morning. Are we too sensitive about racism? If you think we are, text the word vote, followed by yes. If you disagree, text vote, followed by no. Our text number is 81771. Text will be charged at your standard message rate. For full terms and conditions, visit bbc.co.uk/Sunday Morning Live. We'll show you how you voted at the end of the programme. And as you may expect in a debate about racial abuse, you may hear terms in this discussion that we're having that you may find offensive. So, John, you think this is on a continuum?
Definitely. I mean, I know that it seems we've made so much progress, and not just with racism, with a lot of the bigotry in society, especially here in the UK. But the fact is that when you make progress, that's when you have to be more vigilant. Because now is the time when racists, in the case of this discussion, are far more sophisticated. You listen to discussions now, even on television, and it's amazing how many different ways people can get around and say the N-word without actually using the word.
Give me an example.
I think, I would say that I've watched debates where the language clearly moves to the point where, for example, when you start talking about, I heard a debate where they were talking about black people and Asian people and how they had lots of babies, and they started talking about how they breed, a term that we use for animals. And it's clearly racist in its intent, but it's more sophisticated than simply yelling the N-word in the middle of the studio.
So, Jerry Robinson, simply using words which some people may not consider that they intended as racist can be interpreted as racist, and that needs to be stamped out.
Oh no, they can, and I applaud the progress that we've made. I really, really do. But I just feel that the pendulum has swung far too far. Even this morning, I've been hugely conscious about being frightened, almost about talking about this subject, because there's such kind of terror of saying something which is interpreted the wrong way, which I know was never meant to mean that. I think we have gone overboard, and it's now the subject that we can't talk about, whereas it's a subject we should be talking about in a very open way, in a very unfearful way, if we want to continue the progress that John has, applauded, and I have too. To make that progress, you have to get away from this fear of just saying the wrong thing.
Carol, you're nodding there. Do you feel that same fear?
Yes, I do. We were talking about this today. I think there are racists and there are people who cause unintentional offence. And I think, I'll just give an example. Last week I was in a store and there was a lady who went to get something for me. I asked her to check if she had it in stock, and she went away. Now, the lady happened to be black. She was away for ages. I asked another lady what had happened to her, and she said to me, describe her to me. Now, all the assistants were in uniform. This lady was the only black lady on the floor. I was actually scared to say the word black because I didn't want to appear offensive. I didn't want to appear disrespectful. I was scared to say the word. It wasn't that I was being, I was just scared to use the word because, we are all, I think what's happening now is, we have become very frightened and on subjects like, if you have an opinion about something, if it involves people of colour, then you're frightened to give that opinion. For instance, if you have an opinion on immigration, it doesn't mean you're racist because you have an opinion on immigration. It means, there was a report out this week saying Britain is the 6th most overcrowded country in the world. So it's a concern for some people that they shouldn't be branded as racist for thinking that. And I think the boundaries have become blurred. We don't know where to go anymore.
So let's unpick this then, John.
Yeah.
The fact that people feel nervous even describing somebody factually, truthfully, by the colour of their skin. Now that is at the heart of the issue about whether we're too sensitive about appearing to be, or possibly even being, racist.
I don't think it is. I think it's the example that is constantly cited, and I don't trivialise the feeling because I understand it and I've been there, and just because I happen to be black, it doesn't mean I don't also share those. But the fact is, every time we have a discussion about racism, that's what people trot out, the idea that it is this uncomfortable feeling about mentioning the black lady in the shop.
But why is that silly? That's not how we feel.
Not silly at all.
No,
not
that's
silly.
how we feel.
But what I would say is that is not the kernel. That is not the kernel and the core of the problem. If you look at Britain today, people talk about the pendulum swimming too far, and then they talk about blackboards and how we can't say that anymore, and then they talk about these things. But what they don't talk about is the casual racism that does still exist. They don't talk about the fact that when you look at a society, how do you explain the disproportionate number of black and Asian people in prisons? How do you explain the fact that, when we talk about women in boardrooms, nobody hesitates to recognise that there's a glass ceiling and an actual bigotry there. But that same inequality exists in football, for example, the fact that there are 30-odd% of the players are black. But when it comes to management, it's 1, not 1%, just 1.
But John, I just wonder whether you think that a discussion about the language distracts from bigger issues about representation. I'll give you an example. Sepp Blatter showed a photograph of himself with Tokyo Sexwale, the South African minister, who then said you couldn't accuse Sepp Blatter of being a racist because he'd taken the World Cup to South Africa. And an achievement like that was being overshadowed by careless remarks about how to deal with insults.
No, that is just another manifestation of I'm not racist, some of my best friends are black. It's an absurdity. It's an absurdity. It was a fundamentally brilliant business decision to take the World Cup to South Africa. This is not a benevolent man who's been misconstrued this one time. I'm sorry.
Maybe not. And I'm not here to defend Blatter, believe me. But I think that what we need to be talking about in a very hard-edged way is why aren't there more black people, Indians, Chinese, whatever nationality you want to talk about, in boardrooms, in serious positions in a whole raft of industries. Those are the debates that now need to happen to move this thing forward. Not, I can't mention the word black because it's so open to misinterpretation. I think it's actually getting in the way now. I honestly do. I think it has served a purpose. It's made us think about it in a much more positive way, but I now think it's counterproductive.
But in some areas we are too sensitive. Last year, 20,000 children between the ages of 3 and 11 were reported for racist or homophobic remarks. Schools are now instructed to make files on children who use words. Now, can a 3-year-old really be racist? Can a 5-year-old really be racist? But authorities are doing this because it makes it look like they're tackling the problem, and they're not. There was one young boy put on file for calling a classmate broccoli head. Now, we've got to know the difference between what is a playground spat using language the kids might not understand and real racist abuse.
I would say this: it underestimates so massively the power of language to talk in these levels. The fact is that in schools now, it's not necessarily with black children, but LGBT, gay and lesbian children are killing themselves at an unprecedented rate.
But you talk to children, you don't stigmatise them, you don't put them on a file, you talk to them.
Can we just also add that this conversation, oddly, came up the last time I was on this show. That file doesn't go anywhere.
It does.
And I don't agree with it.
That file is kept until the child leaves school. John, it's kept.
I think it avoids teachers dealing with it, but the fact is that language is a precursor to action.
Talk to children, don't stigmatise them, don't put them on a file.
Let's talk to some of the guests that we've invited to take part in this programme. John Barnes is former England's international football player, of course, and we saw, John, welcome to Sunday Morning Live, we saw that photograph of you having to kick a banana off the pitch. How have things improved?
Well, first of all, I didn't have to kick the banana off the pitch. I wasn't even aware that I actually did it. So looking at that picture is a little bit like having an out-of-body experience because I don't actually remember doing that, but it's obviously a wonderful picture. The whole issue with racism, let us first acknowledge that discrimination exists. We discriminate based on certain criteria. I used the example with Sam Allardyce the other night. If I was going to have a heart operation and Sam is from Birmingham with a broad Birmingham accent and Gareth Southgate's got a nice kind of plummy London accent, and I needed a heart transplant, and someone spoke like Sam, someone spoke like Gareth, I would go with Gareth. Yeah? We make discrimination based on the way people look, the way people dress, and the colour of their skin. You have to understand racism. If you look at how black people have been disenfranchised over the last 400 years, it's understandable that they're thought as second-class citizens. As a legacy of slavery, black people have become disenfranchised, disempowered. So white people look at them because of what history tells them. Look at what happens in schools today. When you go to a school play, who are going to be Mary and Jesus in the school play? The little blonde-haired, blue-eyed girls. It is a fact that because of what's happened to black people, that's the way we see it. Now, think of what race is.
John,
let's talk about, one second, let me just talk about John Terry and Anton Ferdinand. I'm not going to say whether anything is right or anything is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Is race genetic? Because Anton Ferdinand's mother is white. His father is from the Caribbean, which means that he probably has some white blood in him. So genetically, Anton Ferdinand would be closer to being white than being black. So is it the way we look, or is it genetics? We have to understand, first of all, what race is, to then say whether that's being racist.
John.
Race is a massively complex thing. People who think it's just about the colour of skin are missing the point. It is a socio-cultural thing. When people say someone is black, oftentimes, and this is in the non-pejorative sense, you are not just referring to them and their skin colour. You are often talking about, people talk about black music. They're talking about the type of music, the food, the areas that people live. There's so much wrapped into that.
John Barnes, did you feel, when you received, and tell us, perhaps I should invite you to give the evidence, what kind of language was used about you when you were playing?
Well, by fans, by players, of course, you heard the N-word, you heard black this, you heard black that, but you can't lump all black people together, because obviously, I believe that race should be cultural and social. That's the way it was thousands of years ago from the Greek civilization. You know, you have black generals in the Roman army because of that, their culture, and it's combined to that culture. So if you look at now this cross-pollination of cultures, whereby Anton Ferdinand, culturally, would be much closer to John Terry than Anton Ferdinand to a black West African, who we have more in common with. Anton Ferdinand would actually have more in common with John Terry. He would gravitate towards John Terry. So this whole issue of race in terms of you are black, of which Anton Ferdinand is probably genetically more white than black. So is it just a question of the way we look, or is it a question of, what about an albino who could be black but he has white skin, so he doesn't look black?
So John, if I ask you...
Issue.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a complex issue. Let me ask you a simple question then. Are we too sensitive when we talk about race?
Sometimes we are, sometimes we're not. I can't remember the lady's name who was just on saying about, and I understand, white people get uncomfortable by saying the word black. She said she didn't want to describe the woman as black. You know, and in the old days it was like, oh, they're coloured, or the gentleman in the... And so therefore, because there's a fear of being accused of racism...
Okay.
If you're a black person, yeah? And
yeah.
I don't want to be too harsh. You know, if you're a black person and you have to look like a monkey... There's some white people who look like monkeys, but if you say a white person looks like a monkey, that's not racist. If you say a black person looks like a monkey, it's racist. Why? Because if you look like a monkey, you look like a monkey.
Okay, well, let's...
And there are people who look like monkeys.
Would both Johns accept maybe that, you know, in years gone by, huge mistakes have been made here, but I think now Britain and British people work very hard at not tolerating racism. I think the British people generally now are even and fair-handed, and I think they try very hard to stamp it out in every day, in every walk of life.
Let's talk to Elaine Sahara, because Elaine, you are a diversity consultant. What do you make of what John Barnes says about this?
John Barnes is absolutely right, but before I come to him, I'd like to address something that both Carol and Jerry said. I understand their own feelings because we all have different ways of approaching others. And racism is based on fear, just basic fear of difference. And what we must also appreciate, though, that we're talking about white privilege in a mixed society. Carol and Jerry have the privilege of saying how they feel about a black person, whether they're nervous, they're not, or whatever. But a black person comes into Britain, into a different society which is not necessarily theirs, and have to make their way in it. It means that the host country has a responsibility to at least try and make us all integrated. We too have a part to play, but what I'm saying, the host country has a lot on its part. Now, if, as John says, there's a history of slavery, there's a history of black people being invisible, there's a history of people who are treated as though they don't exist. Jerry might talk about, getting people on boards, getting whatever, but the main fact is that a lot of people, especially minorities, are simply invisible to the system. Now, when you add to that people who treat them as inferior, because that's what racism is about. It's about superiority.
Well, Elaine, I wonder then, I apologise for interrupting, but I wonder then about this issue where, because you're describing this gulf of understanding between white people and black people, when white people don't intend offence, how do we deal with it when the person on the receiving end perceives offence?
Well, it's education, really, because if you think about it, Carol and Jerry are both right. White people don't go around thinking, well, at least not right-minded ones, I'm going to offend a black person today. But as a black person myself, I don't have a problem calling a white person white. If I'm going to describe someone, I'm going to say they're white, they've got blue eyes, whatever, because that is the way they are.
But Elaine, doesn't that go to doesn't that go to the very heart of the problem? That exactly right, and absolutely correctly, you have no issue at all about talking about somebody being white. Why do I, who believe me, I'm not in any way racist, why do I have the feeling that I can't quite say that the other way around? Something's wrong there.
Yes, but I think it's probably because of what has been happening as peripheral issues, like somebody mentioned a blackboard, calling a blackboard a blackboard. We've got some trivialities coming into it which are not really related at all. But I want to say something terribly important here. I have to agree with John that language is extremely important at any age. It defines us. It says who we are. Now, if we are happy to have racist language bandying about and, you know, being directed at one part of society, it says a lot about us.
Okay.
But I can quite agree with John, with Jerry, that yes, we need to get out the trivialities out of the arena so that we can appreciate each other properly.
Okay. Elaine,
because
thank
nobody
you.
should feel nervous about talking about black or saying the word black or whatever.
Okay. Elaine, thank you so much. And I, as I say, I apologise for cutting short. I just want to get to Rabbi Alex Goldberg because this whole issue this week, of course, Rabbi Goldberg, sparked by allegations of racist language and how that should be dealt with on the football pitch. Why do you think it's so important that there is zero tolerance of this kind of language?
I think that football is our national game. It's a big business. It's a business that has grown exponentially in the last 20 years with television rights. And so therefore it's reflective of society at large. And therefore we need zero tolerance. I work alongside many fellow FA ambassadors of the Football Association, including Garth Crooks and Cyril Regis, Brendan Batson, who experienced what John Barnes experienced, or he just said he didn't experience, but anyway, in the early 80s, where there was overt racism. And yes, that has changed, but let's just look in the last year. I've been to a football match in London where football fans have been singing anti-Semitic songs about Auschwitz and the gas chambers. Surely that's not acceptable to anybody, including your guests, who question where the line is. Neil Lennon, who's the manager of Celtic, on a sectarian front, and that is a form of racism, it was anti-Irish racism, received some sort of bomb device. This is going far, far too far. And also, when we've got young players coming up throughout the football divisions, we want them to feel comfortable in the game.
Okay.
If you're a young superstar, you don't need every week to have that sort of racist abuse.
Rabbi Alex Goldberg, we have to...
Sepp Blatter is totally out of touch.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think that my final point here would be, in terms of, he's put the game back, and in terms of his handshake policy, I think many of us this week think that FIFA should shake his hand and show him the door.
Rabbi Alex Goldberg, thanks very much indeed. We have to end it there, unfortunately, because the text poll votes are in. We asked, are we too sensitive about racism? Here's what you told us. 85% of those of you who texted in said we are. 15% said no. Jerry, you think we are too sensitive?
I do think we are, and I think that that's unhelpful. I honestly think it's a very interesting response. I mean, it's an astonishing response in a way to me. It tells me that we've not got this subject right at this moment in time, and this is an important subject to get right. We've gone overboard with it, and as I said earlier on, I actually think that's harmful rather than helpful. And
John, you presumably agree that it's an important subject to get right.
Massively important, and I'm not at all surprised by the results. But what I would say is if you're out there, and don't worry about whether you're calling someone black, because they are black and you want to pick them out of a room full of white people. Worry about the people around you that you wince a little bit inside when you hear some of the things they say. That is the racism we need to worry about.
A couple of texts and emails we got on this morning. Dee says the fact racism still exists in the 21st century is truly embarrassing for the world as a whole. And Joe says people who are not at the receiving end of racism can never understand how it feels. People must not be treated differently just because they look different. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect. Full stop. Thanks so much for your comments on that debate and all of those debates this morning. And my thanks to all of you who've taken part in the programme. Please don't text or call the phone lines anymore because they are now closed. But you can continue the conversation online. The links are on our website. That's it for this series. So thanks to all of the guests who've enlivened our Sunday mornings, even those who did a good job of infuriating you. Thanks to you for watching and for all your tweets, your texts, your calls and emails. The series will be back next year, but thanks for your company today. Have a good day. Goodbye.